Hello. Hello. Welcome, everyone. So I'm still waiting for people to join in. Looks like we have Captain Kirk coming today on the USS Enterprise. We'll get started as soon as the Millennium Falcon joins in the conference call. We need a representation. I forgot this is recorded, but yeah, I'm commenting on the meeting room name that joined the call.
Yeah, it's totally okay. I just forget that compression mode, that's why. Now
Yes, Captain. Thank you for beaming me up to the meeting. Okay. Looks like we're starting to have quorum today. So, for those who've been here before, you know the drill. So we start by building the agenda, and so I'll be taking notes on the Google Doc that I'm putting in the chat. Everybody is welcome to contribute to the notes. Please, like, if something is inexact, or if you feel like an additional information is useful, or you want to add links to PRs or tickets or any relevant things that would be useful to add to the notes, please do. And so I'll start by going around the virtual room. So the way this works is I call people by name. You can quickly say hi, where you work if you're comfortable sharing, and what brings you here today. So typically you would say what topic you want to be discussed, and then build the agenda from this. it is totally fine to be just here to listen in and not have anything specific to contribute, right? So don't feel like you must have something. I'll go on by the list on the Google Meet, which is in alphabetical order. So, you know, it's always the same people getting started. Oh, and thank you. I see. Yeah, people, feel free. If you have topics, feel free to just add them to the agenda in the notes.
Julien, one
Yeah.
question. Should we speed this part up by everyone writing their name down and the thing they want to talk about and maybe the company they work on, and then we can all do it in parallel and finish in 2 minutes?
Okay, let's do that. So everyone, let me
paste the link here for oh, you pasted it already.
Yeah. I just pasted it again because I think typically people who join the meeting don't see what has been put in the messages, so it doesn't hurt to add it again. So everybody, you know, I can see you just type in your name, what you want to talk about, and just yeah, you have the agenda section done there. So let's do this. On your mark, set, go. Now I'm using my little routine of running the meeting.
We're testing out Google Docs here and how many people can simultaneously like modify the same set of lines.
I think if we try this again, it probably helps to first make the list so everyone is not fighting over white space. You can instead fight over individual entries.
That works. Oh yeah. Oh, some people don't have the edit rights, I guess. That's fine. Cool. Nice. Okay. Are we ready? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 16. Nice. The room says 19, but it's okay. You don't, you know, if you'd rather stay anonymous, you can. But okay. So I've listed the parquet improvement process. We have the flat buffer footer, right? You put in there. Flat buffer sooner. Russell about nothing, empty struct. You don't mean specifically nothing, right? You have something. There's something you have on the agenda that is nothing.
Having nothing, empty structs.
That makes sense.
I think we mentioned it a little bit briefly last time, but just wanted to know what the general consensus on even having that as a feature is.
Okay. So, okay, so we have an agenda. So today we have parquet variant canonical extension type for Apache Arrow. I put the parquet improvement process that we're iterating on a bit. Thank you, Micah, for your feedback and comments on the second review. The flat buffer metadata and int96 on sort order and empty struct. So let's start with the variant. I think the order that is here feels right. So let's start with the variant. I think there's a vote on the arrow mailing list based on that right now. So we want to talk about this.
I can start off with it. I was the one who I put the proposal together, and we have enough votes on the mailing list to accept that we're going to add the canonical variant type. There's just discussions happening on the exact specs in the documentation that for the PR right now. A couple of discussions came up during it. For example, Micah brought up the question again on the ordering of the fields, given that the current spec for parquet variant and shredding explicitly states that the order of the fields for metadata, typed value should not matter, and that they should be accessed by name, not by order. And several people have brought up that they would prefer to have the order be specified, but I trying to stick it close to the current parquet shredding spec, but that's definitely a discussion to be brought up and mentioned as Micah has raised his hand. So that I wanted to at least bring that part up. And the second piece to be discussed is the namespacing of it. A few people on the Arrow mailing list, on the Arrow BMC and the mailing list wanted. So we right now typically we have when you're doing an extension type with Arrow. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but essentially it is metadata on top of an existing type, and we have metadata that finds names. And so we've reserved the Arrow dot prefix of extension type names to be for Arrow canonical extensions. But since the variant type is designed for interoperability with Parquet, several people requested that instead of being arrow.variant, it was parquet.variant. And then it was brought up, maybe it should be arrow.parquet.variant or some other thing to control, basically the wider discussion on top of who owns the namespacing and what the process might be for, say, future cases of this type of interoperable extension types. And I'm going to pause for a second to let Micah speak since he raised his hand.
My take is I think it can be largely decoupled, I think. So on the first thing, it still seems possible to read into Arrow and to impose an ordering without changing the how it's what's mandated in Parquet for the writing. And similarly, because this is an Arrow canonical extension type, it seems fine for it to live under Arrow, the Arrow namespace, and just have arrow.parquet. I don't to me, I feel Parquet kind of they're independent. I get they feel independent to me to some extent. I don't think they need to be tightly coupled. Is my take, but I think other people might have thoughts here.
So one thought I have on the field order piece of it is that many of the utilities that read and write Parquet, Arrow to Parquet, since many Parquet library implementations live in Arrow repositories, a lot of the interoperability is based on the, creating a compatible Parquet schema is based on the order. And so, if you have the order of a Parquet schema and you read that directly into an Arrow table, and then you want to write a new Parquet file from that data, it's going to use the same schema. We don't have a way of ensuring the compatibility of schemas without, if we start reordering the order of fields. And since Parquet says that there's no order defined, you have to go by field name, we don't want to change the order of the fields from a Parquet file that we read and then round trip.
Why not, though? They're equivalent. Sorry.
So I just want to actually address one thing, because maybe I don't understand, but like I feel like there needs to be a logical separation between like the addressing in Arrow versus Parquet. Like, what do you do about shredded fields?
We're following pretty much essentially the same spec that is written for the Parquet shredding spec, which is the order, which is that the order is not supposed to matter, and you access fields by name.
But then like the number of shredded fields can vary, you know, across files, across. So like if you were going to do that in an order based way, like how would Arrow go about representing that? Because I think there's two ways that I can see it going. Like one is that the Arrow libraries actually hide the fact that there are shredded fields and you only access it as variant, right? And that's kind of pushing the whole shredding concept below the Arrow APIs for variant, versus exposing shredding through those APIs.
The extension type as written, when you request the a particular value of an index, will try to take advantage of shredding if it's there, but will reconstruct the variant object if you're just asking for the variant from the top level variant extension type. But if the values were shredded in the original schema, that original schema is maintained, and such that you can then, if you are interacting with the data, you can go to the child fields and project a shredded field out if you so want to, just as you might do if it was the raw Parquet. But it preserves that shredding when you read it from Parquet, so that the interoperability of compute engines, and say reading into Iceberg or reading into Spark or any of those things, if you want to use Arrow, you're not giving up the shredding aspect. The shredding is still there, and it's just a matter of, for implementations of the engines, to decide, do they take advantage of that or not when they're talking about projecting the columns. The extension type does not require you to reconstruct it as the raw variants from the shredding for it to be compatible. You can maintain the shredding, and it's still a valid Arrow Parquet variant extension type.
Okay, I'm just like, I think what I'm missing is just understanding how we can have all of those things be true at the same time. Like I can do positional based projection, I can have shredded fields, I can have a variant type that I can access both as just a direct variant, or I can access the shredded fields directly.
According to the Parquet shredding variant spec, you cannot do position-based. You should not do position-based shredding for a shredded Parquet variant. Right. And therefore, I was maintaining that same construction when defining the Arrow variant spec. Several other people have their hands up.
I was going to. Yeah. So, Dewey, you had the hands up first.
Yeah, I was one of the people that had, at least initially, also requested that we sort of order fields, because that's more Arrow-ish, and maybe use Parquet as using Parquet as a prefix to make it clear that this is just a Parquet schema translated. I think I was sort of involved in those initially, and I just wanted to say that I no longer care about that. So I happen to maintain one of the probably the only Arrow library that doesn't have a hash map built into it, because C doesn't have hash maps, and NanoArrow will never really have one of those. So probably won't have one of those. So accessing things by position is something that I have to do a lot in NanoArrow, because looking stuff up by name is a pain. And so but I don't think that is worth it, because I think that NanoArrow is mostly trying to pass stuff from one place to another, or a tool that you can use to construct these things. And I don't think that it will come up for me. I've been involved in the place in the Arrow C++ Parquet library where we translate schemas from Parquet into Arrow. And there's a place where we do it automatically right now. And I think that not having to worry about position makes that a lot less error prone and simpler. And I think that that is a really good reason to do that. I don't think that having the order fields matter. Daniel, as you brought up, like all the stuff that you have to do with variants, you still have to peek inside of it to do anything. Like if you want to concatenate two of them, if you want to subset them, you have to peek inside a little bit and do some stuff. You can't just, like, field ordering will not help you. There are other things you have to consider also. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents. I don't mind whether it's Parquet or Arrow. I think that the reasoning behind that initially was that their Arrow might want to have a more Arrowish variant that uses more Arrowish stuff. I think that happening is unlikely, but it also doesn't matter. And not too long, I'm going to propose that a prefix that, or a canonical extension type, have a GeoArrow prefix because it's already implemented in like a major library that's been released on Linux several years ago. So changing the prefix is kind of a pain. And so I think that the prefix is also, I think either one's fine.
Okay. Yeah, it feels cosmetic to me what the prefix is. It doesn't really kind of enforce anything. I mean, it's useful to have self-documenting things, but yeah.
That's the entire purpose of kind of calling it reserved is purely in a, hey, if you see the prefix, it's one of the canonical ones versus something that maybe someone else did. But then again, there is nothing that enforces it. You're correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If the user sees that prefix, then the library has done something wrong. So it's really just a handful of library developers that have to hard code this thing.
Okay.
Martin, I think you're next on the order of hands.
Regarding prefix, it may be, I don't know, some libraries would be more annoying to do this than others, but could just reserve all of it and just treat as, look, this is the Arrow. These are the variants that follow the Parquet spec closely, and if Arrow ever wanted to specialize this in some breaking way, then this would have to get denoted anyways. Otherwise, people might confuse it. So just that sort of, I think you just mark that completely separately, and for now, it's just the Arrow / Parquet / however you want to just lump it all together and just maybe even reserve multiple names for this thing. Regarding all the points that Daniel made, and I guess touching on them, the working with the variant type specifically as it comes to whether or not something is or isn't shredded and then retrieving variants from within, you end up running into this problem, at least on the Rust side, where our variant get kernel effectively has mechanisms for on-the-fly shredding, on-the-fly unshredding, coercion, and everything else with it. And the specifics, of course, like the I thought I saw Aditya in here, maybe drop for a second, but he's around here, Andrew Lamb, and everyone, Brian Johnson. Like, we've had a ton of people working on this, and they've been fantastic, but this has been a monumental just beast of complexity where the game has been, every time you open up an issue, see how many sub-issues that has to get broken into before it can actually get resolved. Like we're like 3 levels deep of nesting or something now. It's getting huge. So it's really difficult. I think the main thing will be that it's possible to shred from the outside going in, and then we do open up the controls to let people say, hey, look, I need to be able to access these fields really fast, and that's super important to me. But everything else you do underneath the hood, that's kind of your own business. And there may be divergences between the libraries themselves of how they specifically handle this stuff, just as long as we have those outer controls to make it work. It's rough, but yeah, you raised all of the points you raised are important from an implementation perspective. It's just you got to implement it, and the complexities there.
And I was just going off of like what Micah was saying in terms of like, well, what are we presenting from like the Arrow like API layer versus, you know, what is actually the Parquet layer? Because you might be able to apply orderedness if you're just exposing a variant as, you know, the actual value that you want to read, and then push all that and, you know, projection and everything else down below the API layer. But you know, that's entirely up to Arrow. I was just kind of questioning, like, can we do that at that layer and then still maintain the name-based or ID-based projection at the
you wouldn't want to remove the shredding representation from the Arrow layer, because many compute engines use Arrow as the intermediate representation between Parquet and Arrow. And so, you know, there's two levels to consider. There is the projection of the Parquet file itself, of, you know, do you know beforehand that you can just project one of the shredded columns? And then there's the intermediate handling of if multiple sections of a compute kernel need different pieces of the shredding, and maybe there's another part that wants, you know, the full thing and stuff like that, you don't want to have to project it multiple times in different representations. So by being able to represent the shredded data as shredded the same way it would be at the Parquet layer in Arrow, it maintains the ability for a compute engine, if they want to take advantage of that they can, but they could always unshred it and collapse it back into an unshredded version if the compute engine so decides to. It's maintaining that flexibility so that the optimization is available while still respecting the spec without enforcing it, which is the exact reason for the way that the Parquet shredding spec is designed the way it is. It's just making sure that flexibility is not only at the file IO level, but also at the in-memory computation level. And Micah's been very, very patient, so I think we should let him speak.
No, I was just going to say, like, I don't feel strongly about the field ordering. I think I posed as a question of why we aren't doing field ordering. We can, you know, that can always be revisited if we find there's a hard thing. The names, like I said, I feel like this is much more of an Arrow conversation, so I don't want to take up too much time here. But I think the whole notion of reserving a namespace is like we shouldn't be reserving more namespaces for things that like live as Arrow canonical types. So like it makes more sense to me called arrow.parquet dot something and have like the arrow.parquet namespace reserved for Arrow canonical types. And if, you know, Parquet wants to stake a claim for something different, then it can in the future, but I don't know that it ever will. So we can, I don't know if there's anything else to discuss. We can kind of close on that on the Arrow mailing list if those are the only two things we wanted to talk about.
So it sounds like what's the outcome we wanted from that conversation? It sounds like what Micah just said is a good conclusion to that conversation. It's like, and yeah, it sounds like those are decisions to be made on the Arrow side of things, but you're just making sure, you know, there's not going to be surprises, right? Like that's kind of.
And we also wanted to get the Parquet community's opinion on it in general.
Yeah.
So, and Matt, was your concern mostly around like, hey, if you are consuming then rewriting and you're changing the order or something, that would be problematic, or like what?
Yeah. That's my original concern on the field ordering, was that if you're consuming a Parquet file and you want to rewrite it out, you know, or if you want to write a new, you know, record back, if you want to write a new row group or whatever, that if you're changing the ordering, the only way to ensure that what you write is compatible is to remember what the original order was, and then make sure you write the original order out, and then have to do all that conversion back and forth, as opposed to being able to just do it as is. Because I believe right now, if you're a Parquet library and you are processing a directory of Parquet files that include a variant that's shredded, is there actually any definition on what, because the schemas are not compatible technically, potentially.
But that's
No.
even true with like shredded across those files, right? You can have
Exactly.
different shredded.
Exactly. And
But-
so my concern there is the case where you read a file in, do something, and then you want to round trip it. You want to write it back out.
But I think we're talking about two different things. Like I think, at least I know in our C++, we've I think taken some shortcuts, right, for like semantically equivalent versus not equivalent. Like the point is that if a type is a variant, the schemas are compatible. When you talk about shredding, you need to reconcile that across files, and like, but
Well,
we're saying they're all
we-
semantically equivalent depending on column orders. Like, and I don't think Parquet is particularly strict about column orders. Once you get to 2 Parquet files, you're talking more about like table level formats and interpretation there rather than.
Yeah, my concern was in the round tripping of a single file.
But those are semantically equivalent, right? Like if you change orders, we're saying those are exactly semantically equivalent, so it doesn't make a difference, right? I think most people just sometimes do the lazy thing of saying they need to be exactly equivalent to the same order, but that's not actually like the definition.
I think
Sure,
most
but-
things actually resolve the file against the file schema against their read schema. So like
There it
it
is.
doesn't matter. That I mean that
Really,
That's how-
really, the question comes down to a matter of, yeah, they're semantically equivalent, but what do the libraries actually do currently?
They resolve against the read schema, right? And so like they will reorder things. And that read schema could come from like a third place or could come from like the first Parquet file you see.
So do we want to wrap up the conversation and say, my understanding is, so for the first question on order should matter, we're saying changing the order is semantically equivalent, right? And you may have multiple files with different orders and have to deal with that. And on the namespacing, what I've heard is arrow.parquet something. This sounds like a good documentation of where this is coming from.
Yeah, I will definitely, I will bring up on the mailing list, well, I'll on the PR, and see what the rest of the Arrow community thinks and considers on the arrow.parquet prefix.
Okay. Sounds good. So for the next topic, and so we have halfway through the meeting. So I wanted to talk about the parquet improvement process. I think we can just do a quick sync on that. So I did update my PR based on the previous meeting discussion, right? And feedback on the PR. And so really simplifying based on Andrew and Micah's and Ryan's feedback. Removing anything that looks like gatekeeping, and really it's kind of encouraging people, really sending the message that this is to help people get their new encodings in and to help them make a case for it. And I updated the process. So I think I got some more feedback, I think today or yesterday on this, and I'm going to integrate that. The other thing that we'll have to finalize is the Micah, the Google Doc you had, that kind of defines a bit the expectations that I mentioned in my the process setup. So I think it feels like the next step is to just finalize this PR and maybe rework a bit the doc to fit into that.
Yeah, I can try, after you put in your PR, I can make a PR from the doc and hopefully extract kind of the core and like leave the things that are really TBD. Like I think the main thing is there is data sets we want to use for testing.
Yeah, and I think the gist was we want to be very clear on the things that are not for all cases, right? Or things like, I think that clarifying in the language that this is not like a lot of things, I think part of the discussion was are we expecting you to test with all those data sets, or are, instead those data sets are ideas of how you could validate your data?
Yeah, I think there still might be some agreement there, because I want a core set of data sets that you must test with to like validate ideas. Like, right? Like I don't want, I guess the scenario that I don't want is like, it's a double-edged sword. Somebody says like, I have this data set works really well on, and somebody argues, well, that's a very niche data set and it doesn't do it, right? So like, I think we can build up a corpus over time to like assess the things, but I want it to be a clear rubric versus saying like, we have this data, like we have this data set, or like, and so like, I'd like to keep it small so somebody doesn't need to like, you know, run 1,000 different benchmarks. But I think we should have at least a representative set that can say yes or no, this doesn't move the move the needle.
Sorry, Pratik, you're saying, and by the way, you know, feel free to speak up as well, right?
I know. What I just wanted to add was, I think based on the original doc that Micah wrote, I think there were around 8 or 9 data sets, and just maybe adding some flavor or attributes to it, so that whoever is trying to either propose or suggest the possible encoding improvement picks the right data set for their evaluation. We can crowdsource that to us, and it doesn't need to be.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to say, like, I was trying to collect a big list there, and that wasn't meant to be like a final list that everybody needs to run against. I think that still continues to remain unclear. So like, we want a smaller set. Alkis, go ahead.
Just a word of caution. We tried to do this with the footers, so we built the binary tools so that customers can donate the footers, and it also stripped PII, made it super easy, and there was no interest in doing so.
Right, and that's why we want open source data sets, right? Like, I think the difference there is like, yeah. So I mean, the footer is an interesting case, and like, you know, justifying that.
I'm just saying it's going to be hard to build the corpus. Like it's work, and it's not fun work. Someone has to do it, and it's unclear. And crowdsourcing is probably not going to work for the same reason footers didn't work.
Right. Like, I think the problem with the footer is like, there aren't a lot of very, very wide data sets, and right. So that's an interesting problem. I think for a lot of these other things like encodings, there's a lot of data sets that people have used evaluations academically, and like people use in competition. So I think there's at least more open source stuff there rather than like these very these other, niche things. So like, and then, but the niche things should like have a high, like, we should really be having like a higher bar for some of these niche things, right? Like, especially if they have a high cost for compatibility.
Okay, so that would be one thing to pay attention to. I think one of the goals is, on one end, we don't want to create too many hurdles for people to contribute something. On the other end, we want to have somewhat objective criteria, right? Like, it's not like a moving goalpost that every time someone submits something, we define a new way to decide, right? Like, we want to be pragmatic, but at the same time not to, you know, it depends on the day of the week. If you ask the question, what answer you get, right?
Right, and that's why I think like having a core set defined like makes it very pragmatic for most cases, hopefully, right? Like, it's
yeah. At the same time, you know, like if people have, you know, if for some reason one data set in a specific case, you know, like, we can have this kind of discussion and revisit and fix them. Okay. So is that, I think we can leave it here for this topic. Well, like, so the PR is open, right? It's PR on the Parquet format. It's PR number 513 on Parquet format, and add it to the notes. And I encourage people to comment on that and the corresponding Google Doc that Micah has linked. It's linked in the PR as well. So on the next topic, feel free to interrupt me if you wanted to add something. But otherwise, I want to move to the flat buffer metadata discussion. Oh, like actually, maybe before we do this, so we have the question. Someone added the int96 finite decision of sort ordered versus not. Do we want to talk about that first, right? Like it sounds like we need to have a final things. Maybe I don't want to keep it for the last.
Yeah, I mean, I know Ryan was the one pushing, was at least one of the main proponents of sort order. I think the current status of this is we merged the PR saying like, here's how we recommend people sorting it, and left it implementation defined to say like, if you were going to, if we think stats are good or read back, and like, because that seems to be the status quo anyways. So I don't know if anybody has objections to status quo, if we want to put more rigor around it.
I think it's fine. The end state here, the difference between sort order versus not, is that sort order is going to give us we're going to have to do a blacklist of writers that are known to write bad stats. And without the sort order, the readers will need to have a whitelist of writers that wrote good stats. That's it.
Right. And I think
because this is deprecated, maybe it doesn't matter.
Right, and I think hopefully Spark sometime next year will stop writing out int96 by default, right? Like that's kind of the timeline that we talked about in that community.
So we stay with the status quo and avoid more changes to the standard for deprecated type.
Yeah, I mean that it's a deprecated type. I think the least amount of work that like gets us to a better place is probably good, and it's some.
Okay. So do we need to do a vote to close this, or just accept status quo and it's fine?
We don't need a vote to not touch anything, right?
Yeah, and I think the PR, Andrew had a PR that clarified the sort order on the spec already, and that got merged. Nobody really had complaints, if I recall correctly. So I think we are okay.
Okay. So I mean, and you know, if we can leave it as is for now, say we're doing this. And you know, that can always be revisited later. Micah, can you add the link to that PR in the notes so that you know which one we're talking about?
Yeah, let me see if I'll see if I can find it.
Do you know, like, so you mentioned, Ryan mentioned that, like, do we know what Ryan's position on this is? Is it going to sound okay with him, or would we have to revisit this?
I think Ryan's main concern was like, I guess some of the optics around like, why are we changing some of these implementations if we aren't like clarifying it in the spec? And like, you know, from a Databricks perspective, like I think because we're closely associated with Spark and still writing out in 96, it could be seen as like, it could be seen as like we are taking shortcuts, right? Like I don't think he wasn't going to veto saying no sort order, if I recall the last conversation with him. So it's just making sure that the community is generally okay saying, we're not defining it further. We're going to be making some changes to implementations because they're broken for the N86 types, and like, they'll just leave like a little bit of a weird like edge case. And so it was more from a, I guess, yeah, just like leaving in a very clearly well-defined space, which we aren't doing today. There's a lot of ambiguity there, and it also means that, as Alkis said, we need to effectively maintain a list of known good writers for any implementation that wants to be able to read these back.
Okay. Okay. So we said status quo is fine, and this is deprecated anyway, right? And we'll keep doing this is best effort rate at the moment. That's kind of best effort rating. This in 96. Okay, so last topic, the flat buffer metadata. So
Julien, how should we do this? We have 16 minutes. Do we want to have more time for discussion versus reading, or?
I think at this stage, I would be interested. I think we want to, so we can discuss the actual solutions and so on, right? Like, but I think we'd want to have maybe a plan of like how we want, you know, you've made a prototype, right? And you have a PR open with what it looks like and some of your findings. And so how you want to proceed next? How do we validate this and get to the next steps of, you know, finalizing and deciding what we're doing? So maybe a bit more meta, right, of how we're going to approach this.
So the PR that I have open is not exactly the final state. So maybe we can discuss what we have done so far and then discuss it, then let people read it. I'll give some like very fast overview of what we have done. Let people read it for the next meet, and then we can go in detail in the next meet.
Okay.
Okay, so the footer, the reason we're designing it is because of white tables. And the gist of it is this here. Today, if you read a footer, it takes you O of number of columns times number of row groups to read and parse. But what we want from Parquet is to take O of columns read times row groups read to parse, and not. So if you have something like it's a very wide table and you're doing a very selective query, you shouldn't be spending 50% of your time parsing footers versus doing execution. That's the main problem we're solving. Now, there's some other requirements here, like the backwards forwards compatible. For this, we are using the extensions that we published last year. And some other requirements here that we should be doing. We try to make it more compact than the old and not degrade performance for old readers. So what we did is, first I'm talking here about thrift. Thrift decoding is data dependent. So every field you decode depends on every tag you decode kind of tells you what to do next. So everything is dependent, so it cannot be really fast. So we chose flat buff for this prototype. And in doing flat buff, if you do a kind of a very simple translation from thrift to flat buff, you end up with something that is maybe 3 to 4 times bigger than thrift in the serialized form. And this is because in flat buff, the fields are not variable size, the integers are fixed size. So you end up with something super big. So a big chunk of this work is to identify what can we remove from the footer and what we can shrink in the footer. So the first thing here is the bloat. So this is the things we can remove or shrink substantially. And I outline here the fields that we have changed or removed. So the big one is statistics. And this one, there is a detail below. I'm not going to go into details. I'm just going to point out the problem of today. The statistics are like a string today. And when you have statistics for ints, you end up encoding the length of the string and the plain encoded integer. And this is basically double plus the serialized form of an int to represent the min and the max. Then we have some deprecated fields here that are removed, file path and file offset. By the way, is this the right size or should I go something like this? Is going to be more readable for everyone. Okay, good. Then we have this other thing here, which is massive, this path in schema. This is completely unnecessary. Like any reader can go and write a bit of code and rebuild this because the order of the schema is specified and the order of the columns, the column chunk metadata is specified as well. So you can do a traversal of the tree and figure this out after you read the metadata from the file. We don't have to repeat this path in the tree all the time, which kind of piles up, especially when you have very wide schemata. Then encoding stats, we also found that it's kind of quite heavy, and at least from our readers and some cursory look on other readers, the only thing that seems to be used is having some kind of indication that the whole column is dictionary encoded or not, and then advanced engines can actually go and do filtering on dictionaries directly instead of decoding values. So the suggestion here would be to remove this. Then we remove the converted types, which is deprecated, and we only encode logical types now. So that's like the V2 stuff. And these offset page index row group ordinals, these are offsets and they're actually quite heavy. They're like 8 bytes each. So we're removing those with the intent that if engines want to write them, they can write them behind the footer in Parquet dead space, or we can even specify those and go and get them as a second step, or even as a bigger fetch from the beginning to potentially get these page indices if an engine supports it, but not have this very heavy metadata in the footer itself. Now, here I go in the embedding, which is based on the binary protocol extension. I think you can read this in detail and comment later. And then these are the stats. I have 10 minutes. Maybe I can go into this a little bit. I think it's interesting. So
I think there was another topic. And is this doc shared? Maybe we can.
It is.
You would then like have a more constructive conversation, like at the next sync. Julian, you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I was sorry. Yeah, can you link it in the chat or in the doc? Yeah, let's do the thing where we review this a little bit. So the one topic that is afterwards is the empty struct, if we want to talk about this afterwards. But I don't know if Russell is still here.
I'm here, but we don't have to save time.
Yeah, we can use the time for this. Thank you, Russell. We can talk.
Thank you, Russell. Should I go into statistics, or do you folks want to read this and I just go to the end of the doc and then we can pick whatever we want to discuss?
Let's review the doc offline. So let's share it, and then let's review the doc, I think, and then next meeting we can go in the details, and people will have commented on it, or hopefully we can focus on the questions. And can we talk a bit about the more meta process, right? So there's some good discussions on simplifying the metadata or moving it in like not having everything in the same blob, right? It's kind of like two level of things like you're suggesting or moving. And so how do we get to the next step for this? I mean, we could write a proposal with the new process, and like how do we move forward with this?
So this I didn't document. There's a few missing things. I put the flatpak definition down here. So right now, this is missing the whole modular encryption. And the question is this something we want to move forward, or do we want to deprecate it?
I think people are using it, right?
I don't know that a lot of people are using it. I think there's definitely people that are using it in practice. Right? Like I think Uber, at least, I think has done a lot of work here, and I think maybe Apple was the original contributor. Like, he would probably know better. He'd probably know better, and so.
Okay, so if this is used enough, then I think we should. This needs to be kind of ported in. So that's one task, and the other task that needs to happen before we make a kind of formal spec change is to add a way for this footer to have extensions as well, like the current footer. Like for future changes, it will need some way to embed data in it. So reserve some field, like the similar scheme as the current footer.
Is that necessary? Or can we just like segment off like a space of dead space, or like use the offset more effectively? Right, like right now, we right now we don't have the option because we always assume that the footer abuts the end of the file, right? Like to the magic number. But you can imagine just having like an additional additional dead space at the end of the file that we could use for anything, like if we wanted something new.
I mean, it needs to be designed so that it's efficient, right? Whatever extension we do, it would need to kind of support the migration to a new thing in the same way as the current one, where the new footer stays at the end of the file so that the engines can actually pull it as one-shot fetch, even if it's speculative, so that we don't have dependent fetches and we do 2 round trips to fetch the metadata, because that would be detrimental to performance.
Right. So like if we store it as part of the in like a v4 footer, I guess I imagine like there's like a little bit of framing that needs to happen for and maybe for this, right? So like once we migrate to this new footer, we will have like a new magic number at the end of the thing, and we can put a little bit of metadata in that new magic number that says here's the
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to design it now, but we need to kind of specify it. That's what I'm saying. And then once we're kind of happy with the trade-offs here, the next step would be to take the code that we have in Databricks and basically rewrite it for open source. Because we have a full-fledged implementation right now that works, and it writes and reads these footers. And we can roll it out, but the code is very Databricks specific. It cannot be open source as is. So for this to become a standard, we will need to provide an open source implementation.
right. We'll need 2 open source implementations. Right.
Yeah, I can spend some time on this. I have agreement with my employer. And I
Awesome.
Yeah, I can maybe cover another implementation like Rust or whatever.
Once the spec is fleshed out, I can do a Go implementation for the Go Parquet library also.
So the biggest blocker might be Java.
I'm okay with that.
But yeah, I mean,
I think, yeah, we still had some open discussion, right? Like I remember last time, I think Andrew mentioned, because a lot of the things you've done, Alkis, is also could be done on the strict footer, right? We could say, hey, we could remove some of the craft and some of the this, and maybe now the delta is not as important on having a flat buffer. So I think we need to progress a bit on that. I think there's a bit of discussion in the community to get to the bottom. So that's where also the review and this will be useful. And we should definitely advertise on the list that we are going to discuss this more like in 2 weeks. And then yes, thank you. So I wrote down the people who are interested in contributing. I think then we can have. It's going to be a similar process as for Variant, or like figuring out how we collaborate on pushing it. I think a big change like this, we need to make sure we have support for that and buy-in from like the various, like Databricks, Snowflake, and then, Spark and the various things, and BigQuery as well. Not sorry if I forget people, in the things, but like this, we make sure we have a buy-in and coverage for that, right? And we can move on to a new format relatively quickly. Cool. Yeah, and so Alkis, you're planning to work on adding those things, right? And make suggestions. What's the timeline on your end? Do you have any goals or what you're trying to achieve here? Is this like a bit open-ended? It's like when we get to a consensus.
I would hope this doesn't take too long. I mean, in our case, as a company, we are ready to roll this out in a way that is backwards forward compatible. So the sooner we get some greenish signal that this approach is okay, we're very likely going to start rolling it out.
Okay. Yeah, so let's okay, so let's really follow up on the mailing list for getting feedback on the doc. Did you oh yeah, you have the link here.
I think the most important things here is to decide if we want to go with flatbuff and add yet another kind of serialization format inside Parquet. That's one big thing. The second is these limitations that the row groups, the offsets are bringing. So now all the offsets are relative to the start of the row group. So it brings some limitations to Parquet. I argue here that they're not really limitations or relevant because we have to support Java and everything else. So if the community is okay with these limitations and the flat buff, I think that's the main things. Everything else, the missing encryption we can add and designing the extension point for this is not a lot of work.
So the row group are limiting to 2 to the power of 31 byte lengths. Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess rows limitation is that, you know, no row is going to be less than 1 byte. So it's kind of
exactly kind of follows from it.
Yeah. So I think the only thing I see here is like a lot of people are stopped using row groups, right? There's just 1 row group per file. So maybe that's a limitation of the size of the file in that context as well. So yeah, that's a good point to bring here.
Yeah, in Databricks, we have our own kind of view of the data and the shape of Parquet files. It would be very useful from the community to hear other experiences. Like if people say this is absolutely no-go, then we need to rethink this part.
Okay. Okay, so let's follow up on the mailing list. I think people are dropping off because we're at time.
Yeah. Julien, are you going to share it with the notes or do I need to start another thread?
I think we should do both. So I'll share it with the notes, but I think to make sure people pay attention to this, like make a specific thread for that.
Okay.
I think that will be better, right? Like.
Okay. Great.
It.
Thank you, Julien. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.